everybody, I'm Mrs. Pound and I'm back with the second chapter in Purposeful Designs Physical Science, which is chapter 1.2 about the nature of matter. The first section, section 1.21, is about the properties of matter. So our objectives today are going to be to distinguish between non-characteristic and characteristic properties, to contrast the terms mass and weight, to correlate the terms mass, volume, and density, and to calculate the density of a substance. And actually that last objective is going to be a second video because if I put it in this video, it would just take way too much time, and I want to devote some extra time to it because we are going to be focusing in class. We're going to spend a couple of days working on density, calculating it, and doing a lab about density. So let's take a look at some of the properties of matter. And there are non-characteristic properties and characteristic properties. Let's start out with non-characteristic properties. These are properties that are characteristics that cannot be used to identify a substance. It's because they're true of too many substances. For example, color. We can't use color to solely identify a substance because, for instance, if we look at the substance in the back, that is pyrite. There are a lot of substances that look nice and shiny and metallic like pyrite. In fact, it's called fool's gold because it fools people into thinking that it's gold. So we can't always use color. We can't use mass either because as far as mass is concerned, you can have something that is really light like a feather and have a lot of it, and something like pyrite that is more dense and it can have just a little bit and they can be the same mass. So we cannot determine something, whether something is a certain substance by its mass. We can't use shape either because things come in many different shapes. The same with volume. Volume is the amount of space something takes up. We cannot use volume because things come in different volumes. Think of a glass of water. You can have a gallon of water, you could have a teaspoon of water, or a milliliter of water. I'm using English terms, right? I should be using metric. So we'll go with milliliters and liters, different volumes. Also different lengths. That's can't be used either because you could have just a millimeter of something, you could have a centimeter of something, and that does not determine what the substance is. So going further, mass cannot be it because it's the amount of matter in an object. What we will use for units of mass include, as is written there, kilograms and also grams. We also talk about weight. Weight is the measure of the amount of gravity exerted on an object. A lot of times we kind of use these terms interchangeably, but we should not. Because mass is the amount of matter, weight is actually a force acting on the object. And then gravity. Gravity is an attractive force between two objects with mass. Here we see the person parachuting and falling to the earth because the force of gravity is pulling this parachuter to the earth. And the reason the gravity pulls is because the earth is very massive, so it exerts a very large force on that parachuter. Actually, right now, me sitting here, there is gravity between me and my computer, there's gravity between me and all of the objects around me. The reason they're not coming at me is because I don't have a lot of mass. And those objects don't have a lot of mass. For the force of gravity to be really strong, you have to have very massive objects like the Earth involved. So, that brings us to the question, if you were to land on Mars, why would your weight change but not your mass? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Pause the video, think about it, ponder it before I get to the answers. So the reason why is weight measures gravitational force on an object. Mass measures the amount of matter. Because there is less gravitational force on Mars, I would weigh less. But I still have the same amount of matter in my body, so that would stay the same. So that's the difference between weight and mass. Mass, if I were to go to another planet, would stay the same because I still have the same amount of matter, but my weight would change. That's why astronauts on the moon, you've seen videos of that, bounce around because the gravitational force is different, so they don't weigh as much, but they still have the same amount of mass or matter in their bodies. Now, objects, substances also have characteristic properties. These are characteristics that are unique to a substance and can be used to identify a substance. Some examples are density, melting point, and boiling point. So let's take a look at these. Density is the mass per unit volume of a substance. We're going to take a closer look at this later, but in your book there's a chart that you will see in the section, and that lists different densities for different substances. We can actually calculate the density of a substance and determine what it is. We're going to be calculating the densities of many substances in lab. So what are some non-characteristic properties of sulfur? And I have a picture of some sulfur in the background there, and I want you to think back non-characteristic properties. So these are properties that cannot be used to identify the sulfur. Those properties are the yellow color, because yes, sulfur is yellow, but other things are yellow too. Its mass, because we could have a very small amount of sulfur or we could have a very large amount. Its shape, we can see there are different shapes of the chunks in the background there, so shape can't be used. And volume can't be used either, the amount of space it takes up, because some of those chunks take up more space than others. So what are some characteristic properties of sulfur? Some characteristic properties are its density. Sulfur always has a density of 1.96 grams per cubic centimeter. Its melting point is always 115.36 degrees Celsius. Its boiling point is always 444.75 degrees Celsius, and it always forms a toxic gas when burned. So those are properties that can be used to actually identify sulfur. So our objectives that we covered in this video were to distinguish between non-characteristic and characteristic properties, and we took a closer look at sulfur to do that. To contrast the terms mass and weight, and we used the example of Mars. To correlate the terms mass, volume, and density, we're actually going to take a closer look at that in another video, and to calculate the density of a substance. We'll be doing that more in the next video. So remember to write your 5 questions in your left-hand margin, and we'll be back with density in the next video.